What you're about to see is a shooting incident reconstruction of a historical event, a historical shooting. This is one of the earliest documented shooting incident reconstructions done in the USA. There have been many shootings in the USA over the years, and there have been many books and other things written about them. But this is one of the few that are fully documented, and it may be the earliest fully documented shooting reconstruction. I got interested in this case because I read a book about California history, a fascinating book. It's called One Man's Gold, and what it is, it's a compilation of the letters of Enos Chrisman and his fiancée back in Pennsylvania, Ellen Apple. And they wrote back and forth to each other, and he described what he was doing, what was happening, and so on. Now, he had gone to California in 1849 to be a gold miner, to get rich like a lot of people did. And he took a boat from Philadelphia all the way down under South America, under the Cape there, and back up. It took him, I think it was like 8 months. Can you believe that? 8-month trip just to get there? Anyway, it was a fascinating book. I really enjoyed it. And there's a picture of Enos, and then a later picture of Ellen. And they wrote, and he also kept a journal, a really nice journal, describing what he was doing and what was happening and what life was like in California. Fascinating reading. But one line in there interested me greatly, and that was when Ellen wrote and said that there was a big trial back home in Pennsylvania, and it was a murder trial. And it said, in speaking of the gun wadding corresponding with the paper in his pocket, he said he intended to burn it, but when he returned to the house, he forgot. Well, I thought, well, what was this about the paper wadding? This got my interest up. So I looked into the case. I was able to contact the Historical Society of Chester County Historical Society, and I was able to obtain the actual transcripts of the trial that are handwritten. And they're very hard to read because you have to get through you have to decipher the handwriting style to understand all this. But we worked through it, and we were able to sort of translate this into understandable text. And then I really learned about the story, what had happened. Now here's the background of it. This happened in Chester County, Pennsylvania. That's south of Philadelphia, I believe. And there was a schoolhouse, the Rocky Hill Schoolhouse. Now this, what you're seeing here, is not the actual schoolhouse. It's a typical type of schoolhouse of the period. But September 28th, 1850, school teacher, 18-year-old Rachel Sharpless, was shot and killed as she was about to unlock the door of her schoolhouse. And she's found laying on the schoolhouse steps with wounds to her head, keys in her right hand, and her gold watch in her pocket, her little pouch that she kept. And that's an important issue about the watch, as you'll see later on. Now the suspect, there was this fellow, George Farrell, who lived in the area, a local guy, 19 years old. And several people reported seeing George that morning with a shotgun. Now he carried a double-barreled percussion shotgun. That's a muzzle-loading shotgun. It's different than the type of shotguns we see today, and you'll understand the differences later on. So the sheriff was called, and the sheriff went to the scene and talked to George, because he was a local there and he had a shotgun. And this is part of his trial testimony. He asked him, George, what do you suppose any person shot that poor girl for? George replied that he didn't know unless it was for her watch. The sheriff said, well, why did they not take the watch then? And he answered, I don't know, unless the children or someone came up too soon. Interesting answers for someone. Now the evidence that was starting to be gathered was, first of all, there were footprints in the area right by the school and by a tree nearby. And George's shoes fit exactly into those impressions, the footprint impressions. But the key evidence was wadding found at the scene. Now what wadding is, I'll explain in a minute. But this wadding was collected. Someone noticed it and collected it, luckily. The wadding was from a newspaper. It was just a piece of a newspaper that had been wadded up inside the shotgun for reasons I'll explain. Well, all these things are put together. George Farrell is indicted and arrested for murder. Now, in the trial transcript, he said, Dr. John Hoskins was a local doctor who was one of the first persons to the scene. And Dr. Hoskins said, I was called on by the sheriff to go to Rocky Hill School. I went there as soon as I could get there, and when I got there, I went to the body. I think I turned aside the bonnet on the left side of her head and discovered marks there, which afterwards proved to be shot marks, and I sent for the sheriff. Then proceeded to an examination of the body. Before that, I saw a paper supposed to be the wad, one wad in particular. I picked it up. It has been in my possession ever since. This is what we call chain of custody. He hadn't heard those terms yet, but that's important now. I have it now. This is it. And he brings it out in court. It was day when I found it laying there. It had rained the night before, but the wadding was dry, indicating it was a recent wadding. It wasn't from the day before or earlier. There were several pieces handed to me, and they have been in my possession ever since. Now, he recovered pellets from the body and from the door. The door of the schoolhouse was shot with pellets. The shot was taken out of the body, and the school door have been in my possession ever since. The shot, I suppose, are numbers 3, 4, and 5. We weighed them and found that there were 3 sizes. Now, shotgun pellets come in different sizes, and they have a number to indicate their size. In this case, there were different size shot in that door and in the victim's head. So someone fired a shotgun with different size shot inside. Dr. John Hoskins also testified that Dr. Worthington came to the scene. Dr. Worthington was the coroner. And Dr. Hoskins described what happened. He took a probe 4 or 5 inches long out of his pocket and put it in one of the shot holes that were in the door. And the end of it pointed to a large walnut tree, as you see it on the left side as you're looking at it. Now that's indicating, because a bullet or a pellet making a hole through a solid material will reflect back the trajectory of the round coming into it. So you can tell from that angle into the door, you can follow it out and it will indicate the shooting location, where the shot was fired from. It's a technique we still use today. And he put a measure on the door to measure the pattern of the pellets and found that it was 26 inches in diameter. And Dr. John Hoskins further stated, I saw a wad lying on the ground in a compact body. The wad I picked up was dry. It had not been exposed to the rain during the night. It was colored with powder. It had some blackening from the gunpowder. Now, that wad was found between the school door and the tree, as you can see here, with the red mark there indicating where the wad was found. And the wadding had readable text, and it was collected by the sheriff. And the sheriff investigates now. He went to the suspect's house, the suspect being George Farrell. I then asked him where his gun was. He handed me the gun. I examined it. I likewise asked him for this powder horn and shot pouch. He's holding it up in court. He brought them and also a game bag. I found a few grains of shot in the bag. I took them out, and they are of 3 different weights. So in his bag that he used to carry his shot, he had shot that were 3 different weights, which was consistent with what was found in the victim. The sheriff further stated, I said, these are not the pantaloons you had on yesterday. He answered, no, they were not. I said, where are they? He replied, upstairs. And luckily, one of the kids, one of his, siblings, went up and got the pants, not allowing George to get them, but somebody else got the pants and presented them to the sheriff. So the sheriff said, "George, are these the pantaloons you had on yesterday?" He said, "Yes." So what does the sheriff do? He puts his hand in the pockets of the pants. And he says, "I put my hand into his pocket. I took out this paper. It was squeezed as if you had just squeezed it in your hand. I then opened it. And George, without anyone speaking to him, said, 'I did not know that was there yesterday. I did not use that kind of paper yesterday.'" Interesting comment. I asked where he got this paper from, which I got from his pocket. He said, "I got it at the Goshen store." Goshen was the little town there nearby. So the sheriff goes to the store and he talks to the clerk. The clerk, George Speakman, said this: "George Farrell was at the store on the 24th of September. He got some shot. He got 1 pound of number 3 shot, 1 pound of number 5, and he came back the next day and got 2 pounds of numbers 1 and 2, and a quarter of gunpowder, and half a box of caps." Those are percussion caps for the shotgun. "He then asked me for some wadding. I gave him some. A Saturday Evening Post. I gave no paper to anyone else." He gave him a page from a Saturday Evening Post, which was a very popular newspaper back then. And it lasted for many, many years after that. Sheriff Darlington on the stand said, "I called on Dr. Hoskins and Jesse Matlack to compare the paper I had taken from George's pocket with what they had. We compared the paper I took from his pocket with the wad the doctor had, and those with the paper of the same date with one that I have in my pocket. I examined the wad. I believe it to be the same. It has the words of select poetry on it and is cut like the wad was." And he produces these wadding in court and a page from the Saturday Evening Post. So now to summarize this so far, we have a wad found at the scene, which came from the shotgun, or a shotgun, and we have it matching the paper that was in George's pocket. The two pieces fit together. Two pieces fit together like a puzzle. And then that paper also matches the newspaper in the store from which the wadding came. Now, if you're an expert witness, as I am, and maybe some of you are out there, who would you call in? Who would you call now to further testify about the newspaper? Well, you bring in the printer, the Saturday Evening Post printer. And the printer is John Gilliam. And John Gilliam testified, "I am a printer by profession in the office of the Saturday Evening Post. I'm a foreman in the office. I pronounce that this paper from George Farrell's pocket to be part of a Saturday Evening Post issued May 25th, 1850. And then when he was asked to examine the wad found at the scene, he said, "This is part of a paper of the same issue. It belongs in the first column on the first page, on the 9th column on the second page." Another piece of wad was shown to him. "This belongs to the Saturday Evening Post of the same date. The side I hold belongs to the first page." The Saturday Evening Post from the store, the big issue from the store from which the page was torn, he is shown to him. And he says, "I know that paper. It is the Saturday Evening Post of May 25th, 1850. It is a genuine copy." So here we have the expert witness being authoritative about that this is the paper and these wadding sections came from the same paper. Now, here's a question. If you're an expert witness, if you're a crime scene analyst and you're doing work, is it possible, if someone asked me, is it possible to match a fired paper wad to a newspaper page? Remember, the murder weapon is a double-barreled, muzzle-loading, black powder percussion cap shotgun. Now, if you ask me, I don't think I ever fired a percussion cap shotgun. I don't think I ever loaded one, so I wasn't really sure how the wadding was placed inside the gun. But I got one, and I got an expert on all this to help me with this. Now, first of all, you should know that this is a modern shotgun cartridge. it has everything in the cartridge. And you just stick the cartridge in a shotgun and you fire it. And you can see it has a case, which is the outer layer, the outer body of it. Then it has the shot, the little lead balls. Then it has a wad, which is a plastic piece, the most commonly nowadays. And then you have the gunpowder, the powder charge, and then you have a primer. That's what ignites the powder, which then burns rapidly and creates expanding gas and pushes the shot out the barrel. That's the way it's done now. But with a double barrel percussion shotgun, it's a little different. And you can see this cutaway that I prepared. You're looking inside the barrel there of a percussion muzzle loading shotgun. And you see the powder is there, and then you have newspaper wadding. Why do you put newspaper wadding in there, or some kind of wadding? Because you want to keep the powder from spilling forward, keep the powder separated from the shot. So you put a piece of paper in there, or a piece of cotton, something like that, and you ram it down, and then you pour the shot into the shotgun barrel. And the shot are the little balls, and then you put another piece of wadding so it'll hold the shot in place, so if you tip the shotgun down, they're not going to roll out. So you'll have two pieces of wadding. You'll have a powder wadding and shot wadding. And then on the little lip up here, that's where the percussion cap goes, and that's the equivalent of a primer. So when that hammer comes down and strikes the percussion cap, it causes a little flame to go into the powder, ignites the powder, and then everything is pushed out the barrel by the expanding gases. So we took a black powder shotgun to the range. We set up a door, and we have a distance which is similar to what was at the scene. And we fired it, and we took measurements, and we did some video. And you'll see here, one of the first things we found is, yeah, we put a piece of newspaper in there for wadding, and we found the wadding. It did show up. There were actually many pieces of wadding. And you see how it's blackened, like from gunpowder? And we have a pattern in the door, and we stuck a probe in the door, see where it points back towards. And there's the probe pointing back to the shooting point, as you'll see more. We also did some high-speed video shooting of the black powder shotgun. And that's me using, even with all the modern technology we have, I still use a towel over my head to look at my computer screen because it's so bright in the sunlight that you can't really see the screen. There's fancy computers you have, but they're not that bright. So it's the old Matthew Brady technique of photography used here with high-tech equipment. And then we have the expert at the range who's doing the work with the shotgun, and we'll watch a video of him doing this work.
Here's what we did. We cut this so that we have a piece to load in the barrel, and we have a piece against which we can compare it. Powder charge, approximately 3 drams of 2FG GoX.
Okay, Steve is pushing in the newspaper wadding. It has to be forced in till it's compressed tightly. He's pushing it all the way down.
Number 4 buck is approximately 22 caliber, 24, I'm sorry. Now we're going to make an overshot wad so that the shot will stay in the barrel if it's pointed down. Okay.
We've set up a door approximately 40 feet away, similar to the shooting scene at the school.
Putting on the percussion cap. Okay, we all set? They're the big chunks. If I trap this one,
this is a piece of the wadding that was found on the ground after the shot. And you can see it was all crumpled up, and I flattened it out a bit. You can see a blue line here with some blue lettering above it and a piece of a photograph below the blue line. Now the original newspaper that we cut this from is here, and if you can match it almost perfectly from the blue line and the blue letters above it and the photograph below. You can also see a match with the writing there and the black line.
Now we set up a probe in the door, just in one of the holes made by the pellets, and look where it points back to, right to the shooting location. Very good indicator.
it's a 15 bore cylinder bore, as all guns of that era were. Was made by William Powell and Son, a Birmingham firm, but those shotguns were sold in the United States. That gun could have possibly been the type of gun used. It's a long shot, bit of a pun.
Sure.
Here we see some of the shot that was recovered from the door on the right, and then unfired pellets on the left. You can see how distorted they become, the ones on the right. And now we did some high-speed video to look at the dynamics of the projectiles coming out with the wadding. And you can see here's at 10,000 frames per second. You can just see the shotgun, the shells coming out right there. I mean the pellets right there. There's a lot of flame and a lot of smoke. Remember, this is black powder. We don't use this in modern firearms. We use what's called smokeless powder, which doesn't produce this much smoke. Now we're going to shoot again, and this time you'll see a little clearer what is going on. Okay, there's the shot wad, which comes out first, and now you see the powder wad. And if you look to the left, left of the screen, you'll see the pellets are right there. They're the shotgun pellets coming out. And they'll go a long distance while the newspaper wadding won't. And now we'll look at it from a different point of view. And here come the pellets. Okay, there they just flew by. And there's a wadding, lots of wadding. You can see that you'd have a lot of pieces of wadding all over if you used newspaper. And then another one, another shot. Here it comes. Look at that ball of fire. Smoke, soot, newspaper, and then the shot will push through all of that. There goes the shot on the left side. Makes a big mess. Now here's a close-up looking at that percussion cap. When the hammer comes down, it hits that percussion cap, and it fires into the shotgun itself, igniting the powder. And now look at the mess of stuff that comes out from inside the barrel. Look at this. Here's a shot. Look at all this nonsense. Look at this flame. Still coming, still coming, still coming. Of course, what you're seeing is a few hundredths of a second. Back to the trial. One of the letters written by Enos Chrisman's fiancée described the trial. She said, "There was so much excitement. Hundreds of persons were unable to get within the courthouse. It is supposed that 700 to 1,500 persons were inside on the last day of the trial. Among those were 700 females. Several fainted." I think this was like the OJ trial of its time. Very big trial. So the jury heard all this testimony. You heard little bits of it. And they found George guilty. And George, after all this, he had denied doing this, shooting the Schoolmarm, but after he was convicted and sentenced, he gave a confession. And he said, I had nothing against Rachel Sharpless. She had never done me any harm. I just wanted to watch. And I never thought of any way to get one. George's sentence was death by hanging. And on the gallows there, under the noose, he faced the people watching, the spectators, and he said, God be merciful to me, a sinner. That was his last words. And I don't know why God would be merciful, or anyone. The interesting thing was, I found out that he was hung by the same rope on the same gallows as his uncle had been hung for murder. He was also convicted of murder 5 years earlier. Both of George Farrell's defense attorneys had also been the defense attorneys for his uncle, who was also found guilty. Now, if you knew what George's uncle had done, you could find a connection. There might be a genetic predisposition for this type of behavior. Because what his uncle did was a completely cold-blooded, horrible murder of a 14-year-old boy. And much similar to the type of emotion or lack of emotion that George would have had in shooting this 18-year-old schoolmarm for a watch. So it might be a case to study for that kind of connection. I don't know anything more about what happened to the other Farrells in Pennsylvania thereafter. And the Rocky Hill schoolhouse was boarded up. It was never used as a schoolhouse again. A new schoolhouse was built because people didn't like the memory of what had happened there. I got interested in doing this because I thought this was a very interesting shooting incident reconstruction case, and I was interested in how they did that back then, and I saw that this was done very well. They really secured the evidence, and they made use of the evidence in a very intelligent way, and there was strong evidence to convict George, and there was no doubt about it. But there's more. There's something else I learned. Something unexpected and completely unwelcomed. My research indicates that this shooting was part of an inglorious, shameful history that lives with us even now. This appears to be the first school shooting in the United States, the first non-war or Indian-related school shooting. So from history, we come to reality.